thank you all for coming out to support Ben Wickey this evening. I want to introduce Ben for those of you who don't know him. I realize that's probably nobody in this room. But I would like to start with these House of Seven Gables land acknowledgement. The House of the Seven Gables is committed to using our national public platform to work as colleagues and collaborators with Indigenous communities to amplify the voices and stories of Indigenous people past and present. We pledge to conduct continuing work in this area in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous leadership. As part of this work, the Gables acknowledges this land as Nam-Keeg, or a good fishing place, the ancestral and current home of the Massachusetts tribe, who honored this land for thousands of years as they lived, fished, farmed, labored, raised families, and celebrated traditions on it. We acknowledge the role the Gables has played in the seizure of Indigenous land, attempted erasure of Indigenous peoples, defamation of Indigenous culture, and the silencing impact of colonialism historically and currently. Meat of the day. For those of you, like I said, who probably already know, Ben Wickey is a Massachusetts-born artist, writer, and animator who graduated from the California Institute of Arts. He is one of the contributing illustrators of Alan Moore and Steve Moore's The Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic, the illustrator of Key Longfellow's The Illustrated Vivian Stanshall, and the director of several stop-motion and animated short films, including the award-winning House of Seven Gables. Wickey has also collaborated with the Gables, creating 2 crankies for the annual Enduring Hawthorne event, part of Salem's annual literary fest. In 2025, after a decade of development, he made his solo graphic novel debut with More Weight, a Salem Story. He lives in California with his beloved wife and 4 cats. Without further ado, the man of the hour.
Wow, look at that. Thank you so much, Zoe. This is, am I audible to everyone? That's cool. Oh, that's good. Cool. This is really big for me. I have a long-standing love of this place, of the House of the Seven Gables, and a relationship with them that I cherish. It's my favorite place in Salem. It's one of my favorite museums on earth. And there are several parts of this book where, in different ways, metaphorically, literally, and in different ways, I kind of say that this place is the heart of Salem. This place is sort of, it exemplifies Salem at its best. With its genuine Gothic atmosphere. And
Keep going. Don't mind the lady behind the curtain.
the autumn leaves. And it's genuine Gothic atmosphere that has been since Hawthorne's day and even before that. Thank you so much.
Try it?
Yeah, let's do it.
There you go.
Cool, that works.
There
It's at the incline. I'll hold it here. And of course, all the work that they have been doing since 1910 for immigrants and for helping people assimilate into this crazy experiment, ongoing experiment that is the American experience. The relationship that I have with this place is, as I said, a very cherished one. And you can't do a book without Salem, and you can't do a book about the witch trials without talking about Hawthorne and about the novel from 1850 that he wrote, which called The House of the Seven Gables, of course, which Nancy Schultz from Salem State said was his memorial to the victims of 1692, and this is mine. So And of course, after a decade of doing this, and after it being such a labor of love, just being on the back burner, in the background while I was trying to do animated films and things like that, including one about this place. It's so surreal and weird to finally be talking about it and sharing with you a little bit of my process, a little bit of what the story is, the meat of the book, and what you can expect from it, because it's kind of a weird book. So in high school, I, like a lot of people, read The Crucible. And I had a fantastic English teacher named Julie Calzini, who now works for Endicott College. And we were studying The Crucible, and we had a prompt, which was pick somebody from the play or somebody from the actual history that speaks to you and create some sort of thing, maybe a handwritten thing or something that would have been from this person, maybe a note from prison or something like that from 1692. And somehow I chose Giles Corey. And I'll get into Giles Corey, of course, but his story really spoke to me in a strange way. And of course, I was looking for other such, besides The Crucible, besides the wealth of documents that you can find on him if you really dig, other depictions of him in pop culture. And I found this play from 1868 called Giles Corey of the Salem Farms by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And I was very surprised because this was a play from Longfellow. We know, of course, Longfellow from The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and The Song of Hiawatha, The Village Blacksmith, The Psalm of Life, Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul, all that stuff. But this was an angry, bleak work about Giles Corey. It's from a book in the center there called The New England Tragedies. And it's two plays. One of them is it's called John Endicott, and it's about the persecution of the Quakers. And the other one is called Giles Corey of the Salem Farms. And he gets even darker and bleaker than Hawthorne ever got. It's quite a startling work. You think, oh God, this is Hawthorne. Longfellow obviously put a lot of himself, his own anxieties of the 1860s, losing his wife tragically in a fire, his son going off to the Civil War, and surviving after getting shot in the spine and surviving, his commitment to abolitionism. The abolitionist movement and things like that, but he was such a decent person who, in that decade, was so discouraged and so fun. I usually do animation and things like that, but I thought, what if I did first I was going to do a movie because I was going to film school at Cal Arts, and I was like, oh, what if I have a screenplay under my belt and I do like a Giles Corey, or I adapt this play into a movie. And then halfway through, I thought, well, I want to draw these people because I'm an illustrator and I love drawing, and it wouldn't be mine anymore if I just wrote it as a screenplay. So I had to teach myself how to do a comic book, pretty much. And so in 2015, I drew this, and I think it's one of the first drawings I even did of Giles Corey, just as a dummy. I kind of needed to visualize in my head that it could be a book, so I kind of made this fake cover on the side in 2015, and I showed it to people, and I thought, would people be interested? Would this be kind of cool? And they all said, yes, absolutely, you should go for it. If I'd known it would have taken me 10 years, and that would have been a 530-page book by the end of it, I don't know if I would have continued, but it's very daunting. But it turned into this book here on the right. And you can tell that Giles Corey, I used to draw him with a longer nose, and then the more I drew him over time, the shorter his nose got. So I had to go back in digitally into the old art and pug up the nose in Photoshop. So it was basically the upward arrow key, like, there we go, that's him. So just to keep continuity, you know what I mean. And it just started out as any menace to one's life is, simple and innocently enough. I was just thinking, oh well, I'll do an adaptation of Longfellow's play. And of course, you want to have other books around. You're doing research and stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going through the play, and I go, well, Giles Corey didn't live on the Ipswich River. He lived in modern Peabody. All right, well, I'll change that. I'll say, well, this didn't happen on that day. This happened months later after this other. Well, all right, I'll add that scene. I'll put that in the middle. I'll move this around. And so over time, I got more and more obsessed with the truth and getting it right and doing. I thought, all right, what this is going to be? It's going to be my attempt at a historically accurate, as close as you can get in a comic book, to what actually happened in 1692 with the Salem witchcraft trials. And so the Longfellow bits got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and Longfellow became a character in the book too, walking through Civil War era Salem in the 1860s with Hawthorne to establish a midpoint between today and 1692. And my own research got bigger and bigger as well. 7 years ago, I was here showing my stop motion animated film of the House of the Seven Gables. And I was getting ready, I was getting dressed, and earlier that day, ready to do this, I got a message from a cousin in Michigan, my cousin Holly, who said, oh, did you know that we're descended from Mary Easty? She's one of the last people hanged in 1692, which I had no idea about. And I was already halfway through the book. Not halfway, but I was knee deep in it, or shin. That changed things for me. The book took on a different element, and I became a little more passionate about this story and how it has been told over the years and the misconceptions, and just trying to clear out a lot of the BS that's been piled on top of the facts, just to unearth the truth of what this story was, what it means, and why it's painfully relevant to today's scary, scary times. So that's what this book became. So left to right, I've got Giles Corey. He was an 80-year-old farmer from Northampton, England, born around 1611. He was a curmudgeonly 80-year-old farmer in Salem, what is now Peabody, but what was then Brooksby, or the Salem Farms. He had 3 wives, Mary, Margaret, and Martha. And Martha is there next to him, and they were married on my birthday, April 27th, 1690. I wasn't born in 1690, but you get it. So they'd only been together for a little short while before Martha was accused of witchcraft by the Putnam family, and Giles got kind of swept up into it and formally testified against her. And then he himself was then accused, and they both perished in 1692. She was hanged in September of 1692. Giles Corey was bitter and obstinate to the end, and refused not to confess, but he refused to put himself upon trial at his arraignment. There was a thing where when you stood before the court, you had to say, they would say, culprit, how will you be tried? And you had to say, by God and my country. And you can kind of still see this kind of a protocol that is still followed in some places. But if you don't say that, at least in 17th century New England, the court could not proceed. So he just stood mute, and he didn't say anything. And for 3 days, they tried to get him to say, by God and my country, and he wouldn't, and they pressed him to death on September 19, 1692. And according to legend, I think it's probably apocryphal, his last words were, more weight. Although that might come from a John Milton poem, but I'll get into that later if you want. Only if you want me to. On the right, we've got Hawthorne and Longfellow. It meant a lot to me that we have, we show the kind of cultural and literary legacy of what happened in Salem, and also so that we're not violently going back and forth between the modern Witch City and the 1692 bits, we can actually look in the 1860s, and there's some buildings that are still there and buildings that aren't there yet anymore, and you can kind of you can look at each era and use it as a kind of guidebook through Salem and through the adjacent, the whole vicinity. Danvers as well, of course, where it began. Martha Corey had a mixed-race son named Benoni, which is Hebrew for son of my sorrow. He shows up only a little bit, and he's not in documentation, and he's not always represented in books about the Salem witch trials. He's kind of a footnote. But here I was having to flesh out this story of like, all right, you've got Giles Corey, he's 80 years old and very superstitious, and you've got Martha, his new wife, and she has a mixed race, half indigenous son, which of course in 17th century Puritan New England would have caused so many, at least in this man, quite a lot of anxiety and fear and things like that. And I did find actually, and it's in the book, documentation from later, years later, when he was 21, he testified in front of a court, and it's basically our proof that no, in fact he was Martha Corey's son, and he was living with Giles Corey at the time. So I wanted to get that home dynamic, and he doesn't even show up, of course, in Longfellow's play. So this was something new for me to add to the story. So the book takes place in 3 centuries, and I really wanted people to understand how time flies in a place like this. The street mapping is pretty much the same. The street layout, at least here in downtown, is the same. On the left, of course, you've got 1692. That little word balloon is coming from John Hathorne's house in what is now the middle of Washington Street. I have a pointer. Yes, this is the courthouse where the Salem witchcraft trials actually happened. That same area right here is there's a plaque there, but not a lot of people notice it. It's in the middle of Washington Street. There's a bike shop. There's a Masonic temple right here, but there's not really a lot there to say, no, this is where the Salem witch trials actually happened. And John Hathorne's land here is, of course, Lappin Park, where the Bewitched statue is. And you can see too how the waterfront has had this. This is modern day Front Street, and it's called that because that was the riverfront. You can see here. There's the Sheriff George Corwin's house, and the foundation is the same, but then the Joshua Ward house was built on top, and the old train depot, which was demolished in the 1950s. So I just really wanted to kind of bring back, call Salem back to the seance table, and invoke the dead Salem. All the different Hawthorne's granddaughter Hildegard Hawthorne visited in 1915, and she wrote in the book, "Salem is a series of pasts," and as Salem reaches its 400th year as a community, as an American, seaport, her words, I think, ring truer than ever before. So this is this is my cat, Klaus. He was very instrumental in overseeing the art and making sure, everything was ready to scan. And so all the 1692, all the 17th century stuff was done with pen and ink and graphite and smudge and inks and all kinds of things, to have a big contrast between the more modern stuff, which I drew digitally, just so that we would have you can really feel that it's a different style for each style. Each era is a different style, which I also do in my stop motion films. I don't know why, but I do. So as far as the victims of the Salem witch trials, we don't know. We don't have any portraits of them, but we do have plenty of portraits of people who, were kind of responsible for putting these people to death. On the left, you've got Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village. It was in his house that all of this began. this is when he first came to Salem in, I think, 1689. This is him completely paranoid, in the height of the witchcraft trials, a pure, Nixonian figure, if there ever was one. There is, of course, William Stoughton, the Chief Justice and the Lieutenant Governor at the time, interesting enough, of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he was the Chief Magistrate of the witchcraft trials in Salem. This is what Margot Burns, my friend and the great, amazing historian, believes is a posthumous portrait of him. But I wanted to draw that long face anyway, and Samuel Sewell, painted years after the witchcraft trials. We think of these people as they're painted. We think of Cotton Mather as having this big white, this big wig, and of course he was 30. He was my age when the witchcraft trials were happening. All these portraits of him were later. He wasn't this old man. All these people were young and kind of inexperienced in this world here. Of course, then you also have the governor at the time, Sir William Phipps. He was, and I don't say this to be disparaging, this is literally the truth, an illiterate treasure hunter who was very much out of his depth when it came to Salem. And so when he comes back with this new charter, which I'll get into in May of 1692, there's already people in prison as accused witches. And he's like, I don't know what to do about this. I want to scamper off and fight, indigenous and French people in Maine. I'm going to turn over the whole government to William Stoughton, who's also is tasked to charge and pass judgment upon these people. I'll get into that as well. But here he is going, "'Tis I." How did this all begin? This all began in February of 1692. I'll give you a very brief, abridged. We like to think of the Salem witchcraft trials as being kind of like first we say hysteria, which kind of implies that this was a random occurrence that came out of nowhere. We read about, American history in school, and we see like happy pilgrims, and then we see the Revolutionary War, and if we're lucky, in the middle, we see there's witches, and then that happened, But no, this thing had real catalysts. In Salem was divided into Salem Town, which is this place. The city of Salem was then called Salem Town. This bustling mercantile seaport, and you had the far more rural Salem Village, which is now this town of Danvers. And it is in Danvers, in Salem Village, that in the home of Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village, we start to see some very strange behavior happening with his daughter, and who we believe to be his niece, but she may not have been, Abigail Williams. But there was lots of socio-political strife that was already taking place in Salem at the time. And once people started accusing others of witchcraft, that only exacerbated these pre-existing factions, which of course got worse and worse. You still see this, of course, today in the world, in India and Africa. There, of course, are still witch hunts happening in this world, and they are always happening for the same reason as they did in the West, which is that it is the easiest way of disposing people in times of great change and anxiety, and everyone is at a boiling point, and everyone is stressed, and it is the easiest way of disposing of people. And it still is. And we need to understand how witch hunts begin. And this is how it began here. This is the house in Danvers where the meeting house in Salem Village where it was originally. And this is where all the preliminary hearings took place. We have documentations, lots of documents about the preliminary hearings where people are hauled in before a local court, and basically are grilled on, have you signed the devil's book? Have you blah, 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 blah. Um, and we don't have any documentation of the trials themselves, which is a little weird. It's a bit suspicious. There is supposed to be somewhere floating around a court record, a record book of that court, and we've never found it. But I'll go for, oh, I should also say, one of the first people accused in 1692 was the enslaved servant of Samuel Parris, whose name was Tituba. She wasn't black, as Arthur Miller has in The Crucible. She was actually indigenous. She was from Barbados. She didn't do any voodoo. She didn't sacrifice chickens in the forest. She didn't do any of that stuff that you see in The Crucible or other things. You see here, the only thing that they were doing at that time, at those early stages, a white neighbor, English neighbor named Mary Sibley came over. She heard that the children are acting strangely. This is while Samuel Parris was out of town. And she instructs Tituba and her husband, John Indian, to mix the urine of these girls into rye cakes and then to feed them to a dog. A lot of us have already heard this story. And because there was this theory of effluvia, this idea that if someone has signed the devil's book, a compact with the devil, then that person is a witch, and that person has given the devil permission to appear in their shape, appear in their looking like them, and to then fly through people's windows in the dead of night and pinch them and stab them with knives, and only these afflicted children can see them. The theory, though, is this idea of effluvia, where if you then, within the urine of these girls would be a connection with that witch, and if the dog bites into these cakes, there's going to be a woman going, ah, like she's being eaten by a dog, and then that's how we find the witch. This is not witchcraft, though. This is folk magic, and there is a big difference between Old English folk magic and witchcraft. There were cunning people in Old England who used folk magic to ward off evil spirits or to prevent or cure bewitchments. And these people were usually completely impervious to accusations of witchcraft themselves. I mean, Mary Sibley, when Samuel Parris, of course, comes back, he's, of course, furious with her because he's a Puritan minister, and any kind of folk magic, whether it's is diabolical. But she was never executed, and she was never accused of being a witch. So it's a little interesting. But Tituba was. What happened? Where did this all go? Well, the accusations spread, and word gets around to, the governor who I was talking to you about, Sir William Phips. He comes back to New England, sails back to Boston with a new charter. The Massachusetts government had not had a charter in 8 years. So everything legally was in this kind of limbo. And the Massachusetts government did not really know how to proceed. They had all these people in the jails were filling up with people who were accused of being witches. No one knew what to do with them. Phips comes in and he goes, "Oh, Jesus Christ. We're lucky to finally have a charter." But the people had the Puritan hegemony that had existed in New England for about 70 years by that point was in a visible decline, because now we have a new charter, and oh my God, we're just happy to have anything at this point. Thank God we have a charter. Now we can move on and have a government and have. Oh wait, no, but it recognizes Quakers. We hate Quakers. We hate them as much as witches. We've been boring holes in their tongues for generations, and now we have to recognize them as part of this colony. Oh my God, it recognizes Baptists. It recognizes Catholics and other forms of Protestants that are not Puritans. What next? The Antichrist? So Puritanism at that time was in a visible decline. And of course, the idea amongst these Harvard-educated people at the time was, all right, well, if Satan has declared war on New England, then Puritanism has to be the denomination to come out on top and to visibly be winning this war in the eyes of the mother country. They can't know about all these witchcraft stuff until we nip it in the bud and get it under control so that they don't deny us any more freedoms and rights and independence. Of course, this backfired, and the Puritan hegemony completely collapsed after people realized that innocent people had died. And a big part of this too is that it no longer became about, are we persecuting actual witches? Are we putting to death innocent people? That wasn't even in their minds. That wasn't weighing on them. What was weighing on them was, can we get Puritanism back on track? Can we get this, the fire in the belly that the older generations had? Can we get this back? Can we get Puritanism back on top? So the priorities were completely shifted. And it resulted in the executions of 25, the deaths, the deaths of 25 innocent people. 19 men and women hanged, one man, Giles Corey, pressed to death, as I said, and 5 people dying in jail, including a newborn baby. That's what happened here in Salem. That's what happened here. Yeah, it's a very dark. It's so I hated drawing some of these scenes. Just getting into. I'm just looking to see. So, I was going to say too. A lot of books and movies and stuff focus on the afflicted girls, these young adolescent girls, for whatever reason. It could have been, some of them were war refugees from King Philip's War, with the bloodiest, most horrific battle between a European and indigenous combatants. A lot of orphaned war refugees came down from Maine to Salem. Some of them were working in the homes of these people in Salem, and who knows why these people were acting strange. I think it was fraud. I think it was these attention-starved children that started something, and then, oh my gosh, we can't stop this, can we? We can't, once they had to keep going. But I'm less interested in them as I'm interested in the adults in the room, these Harvard-educated, elite, wealthy landowning men, clergymen and magistrates who took all of this seriously, and who took it to the lengths that it did. Phipps comes back in March, in May of 1692, and he says, "All right, we can't wait for the general court to assemble. I have to create an emergency court. I have to create a court of oyer and terminer. This is to try the witches. This is only to try the witches, and we're going to just get this over with and nip it in the bud and get this under control." Well, what happened, of course, was an atrocity that we still live with and struggle to comprehend, even me. Now, I've been rambling on for a while, but I'll breeze through the aftermath of this whole thing, and then I want to answer questions and stuff, because what really happens at the end in October of 1692, by which time 25 innocent people had died, Governor William Phipps's wife gets accused of witchcraft, and you see him up there in the corner going, "My wife?" And so he dissolves the court, and there are 5 people who are scheduled the next day to be hanged in October of 1692, and they are cleared by Phipps, because he's like, no, I know my wife's not a witch, so we gotta stop this. Instantly he puts together a publication ban. No one can write about what is happening while we're trying to figure it out. No one can say innocent people were executed. No, we can't let London know what is going on, and what we've done, and that we've possibly killed multiple innocent people. So we can see Phipps up there going, "I have also put a stop to the printing of any discourses one way or another that may increase the needless disputes of people upon this occasion, because I saw a likelihood of kindling an inextinguishable flame if I should admit any public and open contest." Well, there was people who defied that publication ban, which is really, like the first government cover-up in American history, or at least early American history. A wealth of really good work from that time. John Hale, of course, from the minister from Beverly, who was on board with what was going on in Salem until his wife was accused, and then he wrote a very good book called A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft. And of course, Robert Califf, the rascally Bostonian cloth merchant who wrote, I mean, we know so much like about Giles Corey's gruesome death because of Robert Califf. He gave eyewitness testimony from that day of, Giles Corey was being pressed to death and his tongue was sticking out, and the sheriff stuck it back in with this cane. Gruesome, horrible thing. But we know that because of Robert Califf. In a book called More Wonders of the Invisible World, which was a lampoon of Cotton Mather's book, Wonders of the Invisible World. This was a retort to that. And it was printed in London, much to Cotton Mather's horror. Cotton Mather, as we seen here, as we kind of know him with the wig, later on, of course, in life, he becomes an advocate for inoculation. There's a smallpox epidemic that happens in Boston, and he is in favor of inoculation, early vaccines of the time. But he's not trusted on the subject of invisible disease because he used to be trusted in the world, in the way of the invisible world of spirits and witches and devils and things. And a bomb is thrown into his room of his house in Boston that says, "Cotton Mather, you dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with this, with a pox to you." He's sort of the boy who cried witch in a way, like he used to be trusted. And yeah, anyway. Reparations are, people try to do reparations for, the families of people who, the families of these accused people who now still have, the word witch hanging over their head as a stigma. They cannot shake. Once you're named as a witch, it's centuries before people can agree that you weren't a witch, as we've seen from Salem. In 1711, an act is passed that exonerates not most, a good handful of the people that were condemned for witchcraft. There were a bunch left out of the legislature, which means that these people were not formally exonerated. Bridget Bishop and others, and also Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who was still alive because she was cleared. She was pardoned by Governor Phipps. So now here's this poor woman who is not exonerated yet, and she has to live the rest of her life as this condemned witch. What a thing, what a thing to still have hanging over your head. The sons of Judge Samuel Sewell, who was the only judge to apologize for his acts in the witch trials. There was only one judge who apologized, and it was Samuel Sewell. Years later, after his death, his sons here tried to form a committee to, give reparations and money towards, families, needy families. It was thwarted, of course, by Cotton Mather's son, who didn't want any of it. Let's not bring up the witch trials again. My family has kind of got a bad reputation because of that whole thing. Let's not do that. A good thing, though, is that this committee in the 1730s was headed by the grandnephew of William Stoughton, who is the chief magistrate. So you can see people, families who know that their fathers and grandfathers and family were responsible for the needless deaths of these innocent people, and they, in their own way, tried to make amends. The committee failed, and the Massachusetts legislature did not take up the matter for another 200 years in the 1950s. In the 1760s, John Adams comes to visit his sister-in-law in Salem, and he stands upon, as he said in his diary, Witchcraft Hill. We'll get into, of course, the place of execution and how it was intentionally forgotten. But it's worth noting, of course, that this country was founded by lawyers who would have studied what happened in Salem, and they knew what happens to theocracies, what happens. They know from Salem's hideous example what happens when theocracies fail. And people start accusing each other of being devils and witches and things like that. And of course, Salem has its own afterlife as, you know, a bustling seaport in the Eastern luxuries trade. I've got a picture here of one of the old former privateer ships returning or exiting Salem, but there's one returning with cargo, you know, from China and India, and that's sort of Salem's golden age. They kind of, in that way, kind of shrugged the gallows off their shoulders for a little bit. Nathaniel Hawthorne is born in this Salem of great, you know, mercantile success. By the time he's working at the Custom House on Derby Street, the golden age of the Eastern luxury trade is long ended, you know, with embargoes and the War of 1812 and things like that. He was fired from the Custom House by this man up here, Charles Wentworth Upham, who was a reverend, a minister, and former mayor of Salem, and he was also the first person to actually write scholarly works upon the witch trials. That wasn't all about, you know, folk legends and, you know, maybe there were witches. No. This was serious historical work about how these innocent people were murdered. I have here a panel of Hawthorne and Longfellow in the book visiting the House of the Seven Gables as Hawthorne knew it. In the 17th century, at the time of the witch trials, it had 7 gables, and then over time, the house lost its gables. This was the home, of course, of his cousin Susanna Ingersoll, a wealthy single woman living in this beautiful mansion of her father. And he would come over her house when he had writer's block, and she said, you know, this house used to have 7 gables back in the old witchcraft days. And he wrote down, like, she says this house used to have 7 gables. I should make something of that. And he did, of course. It had a nice ring to it, you know. In the 1830s in Germany, you've got the Romantic nationalist movement in Germany, the witch cult hypothesis from these 2 guys. They're law professors named Jacques and Boehm. They kind of have this weird idea where they go, what if all the witches of Europe and America in the past were actually witches? What if we take all the documents and we take them as gospel and true? And what if there was like 9 million of them and they were real witches and they were all members of this clandestine pre-Christian religion that still exists in the world? And it all begins with these 2 guys who were not historians and who had no understanding of history. This was, you know, very. This caught the eye of a woman named Margaret Murray, who is an Egyptologist. She wrote a book in the 1920s called "The Witch Cults of Western Europe," where she basically says, "Oh yes, of course there were ancient witches, and there's an ancient pre-Christian religion, and all the witches in Salem were all witches," and you know, and this book caught the eye of Gerald Gardner, a Masonic nudist homophobe who invented the religion of Wicca in the 1940s. So you see a lineage of pseudo-history leading up to the present day. In the 1950s, as I said, it was 2 centuries before, you know, the exoneration of these innocent people could finally be back before the legislator. And a Wakefield senator named George Jelly Evans, his middle name was Jelly. I don't know if it was a nickname or if it was his actual name. He said, and he vetoed this, and it was not passed because of him dissenting. He said, if we exonerate the last of the Salem witches, what will happen to our tourist trade? Other misconceptions, of course, is the ergot theory. I will only go into that if you want me to. It's very infuriating. You know, it's a pestilence to historians, a lot of times people come to me and they go, I heard this started with moldy bread. And I go, oh my God, no, 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 no. Don't even get me started on ergotism. Of course, there's Arthur Miller down there who wrote The Crucible. I can also, if you want me to, talk about how The Crucible is ahistorical and my beef with it. But that's a whole rant for another time. I also have all the historians here who I idolize and who I think a lot of this history would have been lost, and a lot of misinformation and pseudo-history would have prevailed even more so if we didn't have these people. Boyer and Nissenbaum in the 70s, Richard Trask, Mary Beth Norton, Marilyn K. Roach, my friend Margot Burns, and of course Emerson W. Baker, all of whom, these are the giants upon which I am perched with my little pens like a little raven. If it wasn't for them and their decades and lifelong, dedication, scholarly work to finding out what happened in 1692, this book that I did wouldn't exist. So I have a big thank you to them. In 1992, I should actually go back. In 1892, the bicentennial of the witchcraft trials, there was a thing. Let's have a memorial. Finally, let's have a memorial to these people, and we'll have it on what they then thought was the place of execution, called Gallows Hill. And people didn't want to do that because they're like, well, we know Mr. Putnam in the other town, and he doesn't want to be reminded of how his family, all the members of his family accuse people of witchcraft. Let's just let this die. Let's just let this not happen, And so, 1892, instead of having a memorial, there was more pictures of witches on broomsticks, and it was still controversial. You couldn't talk about the deaths of these people. It had to be more trivialized and more cartoonified. And well, let's just have witches everywhere. And by that time, of course, the pseudonym of the Witch City had started. I think a fish packing company started the pseudonym of the Witch City, but it had really become a brand by the turn of the 20th century. In 1993, there is finally a memorial. And it was dedicated by Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, author of the book Night, who gave a very, very moving speech about intolerance and hate and going after people that you dislike and easily disposing of people that you dislike, and fanaticism, and how it is still a danger in our world today. 2005, there was the Bewitched statue, a really interesting kind of homely statue of Willem Dafoe. I mean, Elizabeth Montgomery, not Willem Dafoe. This was days before the show. The show Bewitched was on DVD, and the Nicole Kidman and Will Ferrell movie was out. So it's kind of an ad for that, but it was TV Land's statue. 2019, Trump is complaining about his impending impeachment to a letter to Nancy Pelosi, and he says, more due process was afforded to those accused in the Salem witch trials. Yeah, no, I don't think so. 2017, in 2016, there was finally the not Gallows Hill, but the smaller ledge beneath it, called Proctor's Ledge, was confirmed as the place of execution. It was confirmed by historians, and in 2017 there was a new memorial dedicated there. And in 2022, a middle school class exonerated Elizabeth Johnson Jr., the very last person left to exonerate a condemned person, over 300 years later, almost 330 years later. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but before that, I just want to talk. A lot of versions in pop culture and movies and stuff like this about the witch trials. It ends with people, last people are hanged, and people kind of go, oh, maybe they weren't witches, and they go home and they're sad, and it's the end. And it's like this doesn't have meaning. It's like this doesn't have repercussions. It's like this isn't relevant to today. And big part of this book, as I said, history doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in our backyards, and we have to remember and dig deep to find the truth of what happens where we are and where we live. And as witch hunts are still blighting the earth in India and Africa, it's so easy for us to go, well, that's just how they do things over there. That has nothing to do with what happened in Salem. No, it's for the exact same reasons of why there are witch hunts, of why there are witch hunts here. And we need to also empathize with these people and say, yes, their current nightmare used to be ours, and I don't, in the place that calls itself the Witch City, I haven't seen many people standing in solidarity with these modern victims all the way over, over the Atlantic. We have to understand what happened here and what it means and why it is so relevant to today's despotic times. I was reading on the news today that there were children being arrested in Chicago. What happened here means something. And I wanted to end it with, also I want to say that what happened in Salem is America's best example of what happens when a community can completely tear itself apart with hatred and ignorance and intolerance. And we need to remind ourselves, Anyway, I wanted to end with the words of my 10th great grandmother, Mary Esty. This is her petition just before she was hanged. And it's really good. It's good stuff. But the Lord, he knows it is, if it be possible, that no more innocent blood be shed, which undoubtedly cannot be avoided in the way and course you go in. This is a letter to the judges, by the way. I question not, but your honors do the utmost in your powers in the discovery and detecting of witchcraft and witches, and would not be guilty of innocent blood for the world. But by my own innocency, I know you are in the wrong way, as will appear, if not in this world, I am sure in the world to come, whither I am going. So, thanks. So, I want to just open it up for any questions. I ramble a lot less if I actually have focus, if someone actually has a question about a specific thing. And if no one does, or after questions, yes.
First, where can one get one of those statutory masks that we saw? And two, I was wondering if you could go a little more into why specifically the Puritans had to be the ones on top. Were they just the most numerous? Like why they had to be that elevated? Were they the most numerous? Were they the first? They weren't on good terms with England.
No, especially after the Reformation, right. You got King, right, exactly. Because who is King Charles I executed by? Puritans. So basically in the 1620s, you've got John Winthrop coming in, and he's got his big famous speech, his City Upon a Hill speech, which Ronald Reagan then changed. I don't think he knew or understood where it came from, but he said, we shall be a city upon a hill, and the eyes of the world are upon us, and we must do good by the Lord, otherwise else we shall become a byword in the land. I'm paraphrasing, but there is a good, if Emerson Baker, great historian, is correct, and I think he is, he made that speech first in Salem before sailing to Boston. Salem is the first town. It's the first settlement in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And by the time you get to 1692, you've got these accusations of witchcraft and these witch hunts happening. To the eyes of the authorities in Boston, Salem had a kind of sentimentality. This is this is where our Puritan Bible, our Bible Commonwealth was formed. Satan has attacked the very heart of it. This is the beating heart of the colony. And the Puritans were just dominant, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony for many years, and doing terrible things, as I said, to Quakers and people like that. So yeah.
Thank you for your fidelity to truth and art. I'd like to invite your Arthur Miller brand.
Oh, okay. So Arthur Miller comes in the 1940s because he had read Charles Wentworth Upham's book when he was a student, and there was a new book that had just come out in the 50s, and he thought he would do a play about Salem. He came here, he went to the courthouse, he thumbed through just a few of the documents. He didn't spend much time reading the weird 17th century shorthand they were written in. I think he kind of lost patience, and he wrote The Crucible. The thing is, in the foreword to the script for The Crucible, he says, this is not true history, this is not a historically accurate play. So I don't fault him for that. My problem with The Crucible is it is taught in schools more often than the actual history. And by the time Arthur Miller was old and they did a movie of The Crucible, it had been decades since he had done his research. So he completely forgot what he had made up and what he hadn't. And he's talking about these characters as if they were the exact same people as the actual people whose names he used in the play. John Proctor in the play is in his 30s or 30s or 40s, and the whole basis of the play is that he has an affair with his maid, Abigail Williams, this 20-year-old woman, or younger, and they have a romance, and that's the reason that's sort of the cause of the Salem witch trials. In actuality, John Proctor, there's no proof that he even knew Abigail Williams. Abigail Williams was 12, and he was 70, and there's no proof that they had a relationship at all. And but the whole point of the play is that it's all hinged upon this non-fidelity with him. This idea of, if only he hadn't cheated on his wife, none of this would have happened. Which, of course, it completely wipes away the actual socio-political catalyst for how these things start and still start in the world. Also, the villain of the play is Thomas Danforth. And Thomas Danforth in real life was one of the reasons that the witch trials ended. He was he was very much opposed. He went to Salem only once, and he didn't really like what he saw going on. But no, he was against the proceedings in Salem, So it's kind of like, oh man, the guy did well, and now he's the villain, and he's like the main judge, in this play. And of course, there's also problematic stuff with Tituba being this kind of voodoo practicing black sorceress in the woods. There's just a lot of problems I got with the play. But mostly it's just because it's taught more often than the far more interesting history that it only hints at or references. So, yes, sir. Yes, because he is not in that memorial, because he was not hanged on that spot. He was not hanged. He was pressed to death. Where we believe it to be is in the vicinity of the old Bell Telephone building by the Peabody Essex Museum parking lot. I've got it in the book, but so he's not included in the memorial because he wasn't hanged on that hill. But I wanted to include him as with Martha in that final. It's one of the last pictures in the book of all of them standing on that hill. So I wanted to include him. So he's sitting there. Mary. There were quite a few, and I actually also realized just recently, just this week, that I'm also a descendant of a woman named Lydia Gilbert, who was hanged in Connecticut in the 1650s Yeah, it's worth pointing out that what happened in Salem, this wasn't the first witch hunt in American history. It wasn't the last either, but it was the most documented, and it was the biggest, and it was, as I said, our clearest example of how all of this, how this kind of thing actually plays out through history. Yeah, no. Oh, Minister of Beverly, John Hale, in his book A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft, wrote about when he was 12, he saw the execution of a woman in Boston who'd been accused as a witch, and on weird, stupid reasons, and he talked about that. So he had seen, and of course Giles Corey too, even in Northampton, England, and I think he was only a baby when the Northampton witch trials happened. So I've got that in the book too, of him as a baby, kind of in the crowd as these 4 men and women, the innocent, of course, men and women, are hanged in the ruins of a castle in Northampton, England. So all of this, people who had come to the New World, they were no strangers to witch hunts and no strangers to public hangings and things like that. Oh. Yes.
One of the things that I enjoyed about the book is we talked a bit about like your process was like to, especially like having a lot of photos of the put it back together, like what you asked Salem.
Yeah. So that was always very tricky because there aren't actually a lot of pictures from that. I picked a weird year. I picked in the 1860s. There aren't many pictures from that year. There's some stereo view pictures that kind of worked and were helpful for me. But I took a lot of photo reference pictures for houses that I knew would have existed at the time. But you do have to know how to draw, even though you're using all this reference, because there's cars in the way, and there's telephone poles, and there's all kinds of things that you have to draw out. You have to know how to draw in order to, fill in the blanks of, all right, if I take out this car and this person with a giant witch hat walking through the street or whatever, what do I put it back there? Yeah, no, it was really cool to go through old maps and go through old photographs and go, okay, this wasn't built by this time, but this thing would have been. I would have loved to have drawn the lighthouse at the end of Pickering Wharf, but 1870s, it wasn't there yet, and I thought, oh, damn it, why did I? But I wanted to have it at a time when Longfellow would have been researching for his play. So, yeah, thank you for that. Spence.
So, when writing a text this expansive, how do you know when it's done?
My wife Mari has a cartoon of me under a bunch of research books and papers, and I'm going, more work, because I just kept going. I kept going because I'd be going through all these great, Marilyn K. Roach, of course, wrote an amazing book called, that was my Bible. Working on the book was called The Salem Witch Trials, a day-by-day chronicle of a community under siege. It's day by day. You get to follow it day by day. And so I'd be going through it and I go, oh, I got to put that in. Oh, I got to draw that, And the reason that there's about 30 plus pages of research and notes at the end and citations and all that is because truth is so much crazier than fiction. And some of the most, damning truthful parts, I was afraid of someone going, that didn't happen. That guy, the author made it up. Nope, it happened. And this line, this person actually said this, and it comes from this document, and that kind of thing. And I just kept finding stuff, and I couldn't stop. But it did reach a point where I'm like, I do have to end this at some point. Yeah. Hi, Bill.
My question actually follows on your question. You've been basically walking hand in hand with this project for a third of your life.
Yeah, right?
How hard is it to have that in the rearview mirror now? Is it hard to walk away from something like that?
In my head, I'm still writing it I'm still rewriting it in my head. In my head, I still go,